I need you to keep focusing on being the best version of yourself you can be, because this time will pass. And once this time passes, you're still going to be left with who you are at that moment. And who you are in that moment, a year from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, after all of the shit that's going on in the US right now and globally, after this shit moves on, you're going to be left with that version of yourself. And that version of yourself is going to be built off of the decisions that you've made today, the feelings that you made today, the priorities that you have today, and the ones that you keep showing up for that you think are actually worth it in the long term. I think what's happening right now is making everyone reflect on the long-term implications of what they have been choosing for their lives. And a lot of us have been conditioned to think short-term, whether it's thinking short-term financially, thinking short-term in your career, in the impact that you want to make, thinking short-term in your relationships. Because if you think about like the way that we're conditioned, even from childhood, it's like, what do you want to be when you grow up? It's always been focused on what is the vision. And when you just focus on the vision of things, you don't think about what is it that you actually care about. You end up caring about the things that you think you need to care about in order to get to that vision. So if you say, yeah, I want to be a doctor. Okay, well, now you have to value education in a very specific way. You have to go through medical school in a very specific way. And let's say like you don't even know that something like Chinese medicine exists. Okay, you're going to be valuing Western medicine and like the medical model that they exist there, and like the way that they perceive disorders, they perceive treatment. If you value family, but you think that that comes through marriage, that comes through children, and you have to like be heterosexual, you have to have a ring on your finger by a certain age, you need to like have kids by a certain age, because otherwise like there's no way for you to have a family. You shut off all of these ways that you could become a family, that you could have a family. You don't think about community as family. You don't think about adoption as family. You don't think about, you know, maybe you are LGBT. You don't think about, oh, maybe I could do it a different way, right? We are so conditioned to think in like what we can see, what others have created for us, what has been in our environment as what is possible, that allows us to then go after it. The issue is that when you work that way, you lose out on who it is that you are. This is where you have the quarter life crisis of like, who am I really? This is where you have the midlife crisis of like, what have I been doing with my life? And you wake up one day and you're like in a marriage that you don't want to be in, you're working in a career that you don't want to be in, that you have no purpose in. And you kind of end up, what happens is that you either go one of two ways. Now, these two paths are going to have different names to them. They're going to feel differently in different decisions that you make, but it's going to be that fork in the road. And the best way I can explain this is by using Erik Erikson's model of psychological development. If you don't know Erik Erikson, he was a very prominent psychologist who came up with this, like Erik Erikson's psychosocial stages, basically saying that at different ages, we go through different crises. And each crisis, there is a favorable outcome, which is essentially you meet the challenge head on and you overcome it. And when you overcome it, it's like a video game character, like you gain strength, right? You like leveled up, you learn this new skill, and you have this new thing in your identity that you can use. You have a new weaponry you can use, whatever. On the other hand, the unfavorable outcome is that you lose, right? You don't gain that skill, and it actually deters you, it hurts you in some way. So for example, in this chart, what you'll see is in infancy. So when you're a baby, you're learning trust versus mistrust. And this is all about whether or not your needs got met. So as a baby, if you cried and you were not like met with attention, somebody didn't come check in to see if you needed food or if you had a poopy diaper or whatever, you learned mistrust. But if you were met with trust and like you had your needs met, you trusted that like the world is safe, that you can depend on other people. What this builds is hope. It builds this virtue of hope. This is what builds inside of you, okay? And essentially, if you didn't have this, right? Think about the hopelessness and the learned hopelessness of my needs will never get met, that my needs are not important. And this is now internalized in you because we have been seen and proven in psychological studies of how your subconscious is formed by the time you are 8 years old. So all these things are adding up, right? And then we go into like early adulthood where you're looking at autonomy versus shame and doubt. And this is like, can you trust yourself to like, do you have independence? Like, can you go and do things yourself? Or are you incapable? And now you have shame, right? Because I can't do it. And this builds will. And then what we look at the quarter life crisis, right? This is the identity versus confusion and the intimacy versus isolation. This is like the big part that I feel like most people struggle with. But oftentimes the struggle of early adulthood and late adolescence didn't start from this, it started from everything else. Because when you successfully overcome each crisis, this builds the self-concept that you have. This builds not just the self-concept of who you are and like that you can do things like you know, it's okay if things are hard, you can overcome them, you can learn new skills and all this stuff, and build high self-esteem, which I think is the number one skill that you need to learn as a child, that your parents are responsible for, but most people do not understand that. If you did not have that, you're losing out on all these virtues. You're losing out on the sense of self. To me, virtues is not just about like good, bad morality. The virtues is about how do you feel, like what is directing you within yourself? What is directing your actions within yourself, right? So by the time you get to early adolescence and early adulthood, and your challenge here or your crisis is like, who am I? So many of us go into confusion because we didn't learn that we can make our own decisions, that our needs are going to be met, that we can trust other people. We didn't learn that we actually are competent and we can like work on skills and we can build skills. We don't learn this growth mindset. So obviously it becomes really scary to figure out like, well, who are we, right? And I think when we don't have a solid identity, we are unable to be in integrity with ourselves. This is really important. If we cannot be in integrity, which means that you are living in congruence with who you are, who you think you are, and how you actually act, what your values are, what you are prioritizing in your life. If you cannot be congruent in that thing, it doesn't matter if you want $1 million business. It doesn't matter if you want to be married. It doesn't matter if you want a nice career. It doesn't matter if you want to help save the world. You're not going to be able to do it because there is a mismatch, right? You're going to be constantly pulled back and forth because you're like, I don't know what's good. I don't know what to do. I don't know who I am. And then same thing in the early adulthood, right? Intimacy versus isolation is like, can you form attachment? Can you form secure attachment? Can you form relationships? Can you self-reflect, right? Are you able to like not just be socialized, but like, can you actually develop an intimate relationship with somebody? And this doesn't mean sex. This literally is like, can you be vulnerable with somebody? Can you hold space for somebody? Can you meet someone who's different from you and not meet them at a place of judgment, but actually meet them in a place of curiosity? Can you let yourself be seen, be authentic, and let other people potentially judge you, but trust that you have a solid identity in yourself, right? Because you successfully went through that crisis of identity, and be solid in yourself, that now you can let yourself be seen genuinely and trust that if somebody doesn't like you, it's not personal. Like, they just don't like you because you're not for them and you're not going to be for everybody. And this is going to be what helps people actually have solid relationships, friendships, romantic relationships, coworkers, all of that, right? And then we keep going down like the midlife crisis. We go through like the end of life crisis, like all of that stuff. This is so important to understand because when the world feels so chaotic outside of us, it makes us feel disoriented internally. And if we feel disoriented internally, then we lose our sense of power, we lose our sense of hope, we lose like our drive and our motivation to live. And it is so important for us to come back to our center, because what's really going on right now is that we are seeing an old system crumble and a new system being built at the same time, okay? Just know that when you see all these like terrible people in this world, there are also a ton of good people with a lot of good intention who has decided that the best thing for them to do is to break the system from the inside. So they entered in the financial institutions, they entered in the medical institutions, the law institutions, like education. They entered in the system and they are actively trying to break it from the inside out by being like these beings of light, by speaking the truth. And simultaneously, there was enough people who are like, F this system, we're gonna bring something new in. So there are actually these whole new systems, these whole new worlds that have been building over time, and it's been happening for centuries. But these light workers who are teaching their kids like actual life skills of emotional intelligence, not putting them through traditional school, but actually learning like how to commune with nature. These are people who are much more spiritually evolved, much more emotionally intelligent. And this isn't even just like a woo-woo thing. Like, this is literally just like think about living in what a utopia would be. It's people who like actually want to treat people like human beings. It's people who actually care about their neighbors. It's people who actually understand what community is and aren't like acting from ego and acting from selfishness, right? So you take this like whole new world that has been building and you take the world that's crumbling, and what we're seeing right now is they are converging. Okay, we're seeing this convergence happen, and that's going to be messy because this has to fall apart and this needs to like rise. That's why I say it's so important for you to keep focusing on your healing, to keep focusing on yourself, on your development, because you are part of this rise. If you are still watching this, you are part of this rise. And when you rise yourself, you're going to uplift other people, you're going to uplift humanity.